Hello Year 8. We are starting a new topic today, so we're looking at something called HACCP, which I will go through in a moment. So learning aims are, I can apply the principles of working safely to a wider food environment. So taking what you know and how you can work safely in the kitchen to looking at the food environment kind of as a whole, whether that's in school or in a business. So the main one we're going to be looking at today is I can describe control measures that can be put in place to prevent hazards from occurring. To be able to do that, we need to know the difference between what a hazard is, what a risk is, so we're going to go through that very, very quickly now. So HACCP stands for, the H stands for hazard, A for analysis, C for critical, C for control, and P for point. So hazard analysis, critical control point, and it's a way of managing food safety hazards or kind of hazards that could occur in food environments. So what is a hazard? I'm sure if I ask you what a hazard is, you'll be able to give me some examples. When we talk about hazards and risks, it can kind of get a little bit confused sometimes in people's heads, so we'll just clarify things before we move on. A hazard is something that is dangerous or could cause harm. A food hazard is something that could make food unsafe or unfit to eat. A food hazard is something specific to food. A hazard could still occur in a kitchen. It wouldn't necessarily be a specific food hazard if you were talking about, say, a hot pan, for example. So you can see on the image, hazard, something that could potentially cause harm. Now we'll look at risk. So a risk is how likely a hazard is to cause harm. So it can be talked about as hazard plus exposure. So what that means is a shark is a hazard. It could cause you harm. Your risk is the hazard, the shark, it could be harmful, plus exposure. That means if you were sat on your sofa watching a documentary about sharks on the TV and they're in the ocean thousands of miles away from you, your exposure is zero, so therefore the risk to you at that moment in time is zero. If you were swimming, I don't know, in Australia, somewhere where there's lots of sharks, and the shark was there, your risk, your exposure, because you are exposed to the hazard, has dramatically increased. All right, so there's a few different examples I'll show you. So driving on a road is a hazard. It has the potential to cause you harm, but most of the time when you drive on the road, it's not an issue. Your risk is that exposure. So if you are driving in a blizzard, for example, that's going to increase your risk of being harmed. Okay. Similarly, shaving your face, small hazard, might nick yourself, but compare that to shaving a bear, your risk has increased massively. All right. So what you're going to, if I can speak, what you're going to do is you're going to identify 10 hazards in a kitchen. It could be a home kitchen, school kitchen, catering kitchen, whichever you find easiest. And you're going to identify how you can reduce the risk for each hazard. So for example, water could be a hazard. To reduce the risk of harm, you might say clean up spillages immediately and use appropriate wet floor signage. You could also, for water, say how to reduce the risk of harm is using a jug to pour water from one place to another. You could say have hot water taps labelled to reduce scalding. There's loads and loads and loads of different hazards and multiple ways that you can reduce the risk of harm. Another example would be, if we go back to the shark analogy, so a hazard might be a knife, kitchen knife. The risk would be if you have a kitchen knife that is locked away in a drawer, the risk is very, very minimal that you're going to cause yourself harm. If you have a knife, I don't know, the dog manages to get hold of the knife and is running around the kitchen, your hazard plus the exposure, so the dog running around with the hazard, has massively increased your risk. All right, so to reduce that risk, we keep it locked away in the drawer. All right, so hopefully you can see the difference between hazard versus risk. Hazard is something that can cause harm. Risk is how likely it is for that harm to take place. Okay, once you've done the task, upload it onto Teams and then join back onto the live call. Thank you, Year 8.